Okay, that's recording okay now?
Yep.
Okay. Right,
As I say, our glider came in,
sorry, can I
crash landed in the dark, broke in two. A lot of us were bodily shaken, a lot of the glider pilots were very bodily shocked. A young officer asked two of us to see if we could find out any road or tracks. Anywhere. We stumbled across a few hedgerows in the dark. We hadn't a clue where we were. We got to a small track, and it was actually this lad called Jones, decided, I'll go 100 yards this way, if you go 100 yards that way, and we'll meet back and see if we can make our way back to the glider. As I say, I met up with some Canadians who had strongly advised me to stay with them, which I did. And we finished up at Frankeville Plage, which was a German gun battery, which contained 4 heavy guns which were trained on Sword Beach. Now, we met up with the paratroopers who kept coming in dribs and drabs. Colonel Ottaway, who was a former Royal Ulster Rifle Major, he was now a Lieutenant Colonel in command of the 9th Para Battalion. My company Sergeant Major was William Cunningham, who was now RSM of the 9th Para. We laid there for a bit waiting on the rest of the battalion, but who never came. So instead of 600 men attacking, there were 150 of us, including a couple of Canadians and myself. And we went in 3 groups, rushed the barbed wire. Some lads hurled themselves on it, and we ran over the top. There were explosions going on all around us, and we realised we were running through a minefield. But actually, we got to the gun emplacements, charged in. There was a bit of hand-to-hand fighting, but literally we wiped the German garrison out, which was numbered 130 odd. But we'd suffered as well because of the 150 of us. At the end of the battle, there were 70 of us left standing, the rest had been killed or wounded. The guns were dismantled, and as we moved off, Colonel Ottaway suggested that as I should have landed near Ranville, a young officer, engineer I believe he was, and I should head that way because he was responsible for areas of Ranville. So the two of us set off, and after a few exciting encounters that were actually fired on by some of our own troops, we got to Ranville late on in the afternoon, just as the 6th Airborne gliders were swooping in. They were coming in, the bulk of them were coming in. And I arrived at my destination, which was Ranville. Well, we then had to clear Ranville, which I think there was a company of the German 21st Panzer Division were based there. But with the paras and whatnots, we cleared it, and we set off to set divisional headquarters up at a place called Les Basses Ranville, just in the outskirts of Chateau. But the Germans had it zeroed in, and we took quite a pounding. And that was where quite a lot of our lads were lost from our platoon. And some of the senior officers were wounded and badly killed. So we moved up to an esplanade, higher ground at Ranville, and there we were there for the next, I would say month. At night, we were tormented and bitten alive by mosquitoes. The Germans had flooded the whole area, and these mosquitoes had been breeding there, so we had that torment. And the Luftwaffe coming over at night, who were bombing at random. As soon as it was dark, over they'd come. Also, the Germans were attacking us from, it was, I'm trying to think, Breville Ridge, which is a series of hard high ground just to the north of us. And then we realised they'd brought a new division in from Le Havre, 20,000 odd men with self-propelled guns and tanks, who kept probing and attacking us for the next month. They actually were on the verge of breaking through. I think it was a week after D-Day, when General Gale, who was our divisional commander, he was nicknamed Windy Gale, shoved all the reserves he had in, and we counter-attacked the Germans at Bréville and managed to drive them out. But we lost nearly 200 men in taking it. Lord Lovett, who was in command of some of the commandos there, was badly wounded, and 2 commanding officers of the parachute battalions were killed. But the Germans were driven out and never got back into Bréville again. And we found out that later in the war that we had taken heavy casualties, but we'd inflicted even heavier casualties on them. We knew that because commanding officer of one German division was brought in, wounded, and he was in tears, and he said we'd destroyed his division. That was the German 7th 111th Division, Infantry Division. We practically wiped it out. But as I say, we had taken heavy casualties. For the next, from 2 months, we were holding the left flank of the invasion area, preventing the Germans from getting through to the beaches. And during that time, we were taking steady casualties and inflicting heavy casualties on the Germans. But in the beginning of August, we were given the orders to advance, and we pushed up the coast. This was during the period of when the main breakout occurred near Caen. Well, we advanced up the coast. We took Juville, Trouville, and I must admit the Germans fought a very controlled rearguard action with self-propelled guns. They'd mined all the main roads, so we were forced into the fields. And at the end of August, we were reinforced with a Belgian brigade. We were that badly depleted. And I reached the area of Honfleur, round about all that area. The Germans had blown the bridges and retreated into Le Havre. And at that, they said our campaign in Normandy was at an end. We were being taken home to be reinforced. We found out later that we'd taken, of the 9,000 of us had gone in, 4,900 were killed or wounded or were still missing. The missing, most of them had been drowned. Those that weren't captured were drowned in the swamps. Because if you remember, the paratroopers dropped with a kit bag attached to the leg, a rifle attached to the other leg, and with the heavy equipment, if you went down and you went into above 5 or 6 feet of water, you'd had it because you could never move. I'll go and see who that is.
Sorry, it's fine. Right, that's starting the camera now.
Well, I was one of a family of 7. And my elder brother, at the outbreak of war, he joined the RAF. And 1941, I had just started work at a Yort's Mill in Belfast. But on April the 16th, this is always in my mind, I know the exact date, the Germans blitzed Belfast. The mill I worked at went up in flames. The area, North Belfast, where I was born and brought up, was heavily bombed, and I lost a few school chums because a few streets were hit by bombs. They came back again in May and blitzed Belfast again. My dad, who was a shipyard worker, who actually, as a matter of interest, his first ship that he helped was the Titanic.
Really? Wow.
It was built at Ardennes in Belfast, collapsed and died in 1942. My mother had long since disappeared off the scene, so the family split up, and I decided I was going to join the army. I went to the recruiting office, told them I was 18, I was actually 16, and as I said, I was posted to Omagh, did my training there and was posted to the Royal Irish Fusiliers, which was a training battalion, a holding battalion who sent drafts out. A lot of them went to the Middle East, but I was sent to the Royal Ulster Rifles after volunteering for airborne troops, the Ulster Rifles being a glider-borne battalion to a newly formed 6th Airborne Division.
Okay,
and that was the start of my army career.
Okay, just going back, when you joined up, did the recruiting officer guess, do you think, that you were underage?
He asked me what age I was, and I told him I was 18. He said, "Have you a birth certificate?" And I said it was destroyed in the air raids. He said, "Well, bring us a letter from your mother stating your age." So I went back the following day with a letter I'd written myself stating I was 18, handed it to him, and that satisfied him. I was given 7 shillings and a travel warrant, and that was it. But I wasn't on my own, because there were droves of young lads, all who must have been under 18 years of age. And apparently this happened in the First World War, and it happened Second World War as well. There were quite a lot of lads who were underage, because when I arrived at the Ulster Rifles, Major Vickery, who was my company commander, Company Sergeant Major Bill Cunningham, walked along the ranks, and he got to me and he said, "What age are you?" And I said, "18, sir." And he just muttered, yeah. Anyway, this is a tale. It's rather humorous, but it's quite true. As a new youngster, I stood there, and Major Vickery spoke to me, and he said, "Do you know your Sergeant Major's name?" So I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "Sergeant Major Pons." Well, there was such a tittering and laughing from the rear rank, and Company Sergeant Major Pons, as I called him, looked at me and he said, "My name's Cunningham, Company Sergeant Major William Cunningham. I know I have a fresh complexion." He stroked his face, and he said, "I know the comedians in the rear rank have nicknamed me Pons Cream." He said, "But the name's Cunningham, boy, and don't ever forget it." I said, no, sir." And he was quite a very good officer as well, good non-commissioned officer. He was killed in Normandy, as Major Vickery was killed in the Rhine crossing.
Did you ever tell anyone you were underage, like any of your friends?
Yes, they all guessed. Some of them were underage as well.
So that you just kept it to
Herbie
yourselves?
Mearns was under, that lad that was killed on the 9th. He was underage. And it was a very strange thing with him. We were walking back from Salisbury, we'd been having a pint or two, and he asked me, he said, "What's it like when you go back off leave?" I said, I'm usually asked when I go back. I said, "Nobody really bothers." Oh, he said, "I'm the only lad." He said, "I have 3 sisters," he said, "and my mother breaks her heart." He said, "God help us if it happens to me, she'll go round the twist." I said, "He was killed on the 9th, so I don't know what his mother, she must have gone through."
So whereabouts did you join up? Did you join up in Belfast?
No, I joined up in London, because the family had moved to London.
Was that because
Seven Sisters Road in London I joined up in. And as I say, I got a travel warrant, 7 bob. And the coincidence was I went back to Northern Ireland, to Omagh, because I'd asked to go in an Irish regiment, the Ulster Rifles, which was Belfast's own regiment. It's now known as the Royal Irish Rifles. They're all amalgamated.
When war broke out, were you surprised when you heard war started?
Not really, because I was used to conflict in Belfast. There'd been conflict all through my life, with the 2 sections of community at each other's throats. Even in, if you will, if I can explain to you, they never lived together.
Catholics and Protestants.
Catholics and Protestants didn't live together. I'm a Protestant, so I lived on one side of the Crumlin Road in North Belfast. The Catholics lived on the other side. Now I realise the stupidity of it all, but that was the way things were. Kids were brought up to hate the other side, and the other side were brought up to hate them. And this enmity has gone on for 100 years. And the result was the conflict that happened in the last 20, 30 years. As a matter of fact, I know about that because my younger brother who went back to Belfast, joined the RUC. He'd been in the Marines, and it was a very traumatic time for him and his family, being a policeman in Belfast. He's dead. He died a few years ago. But it showed the futility to me since then of what's happening, you know, the hatred. It'll take generations for it to die off. Generations.
So, do you mind if I
Anyhow,
I'm just checking the camera's recording, okay? Yes, recording fine.
as I say, we came back to England, and I came back, funny enough, over the Mulberry Harbour. They took us to Ardennes, and we climbed up on a ship and took us to Southampton. We were given a very nice warm reception at Southampton by the ladies with mugs of tea and cakes, and before we were driven back to camp. When we got back to camp, after we'd had a fortnight's leave, they decided that because the way gliders had been landing way off target, that they'd had to have a parachute section. So that meant an extra shilling a day. Glider-borne men got a shilling a day, paratroopers got 2 shillings a day extra. So I was sent to Ringway, Manchester Airport, where I did my parachute course, got me wings and got an extra shilling a day. That was in November. We were due to go on leave Christmas because we were steadily being reinforced, when suddenly we're all warned to stand by. We're moving. We're issued with ammunition, grenades, what have you. Rushed down on a special train from Bulford to Dover, Dover to Calais, Christmas Eve, and rushed through to the Ardennes. And we were then told the Germans had broken through the American lines, and we were driven between Dinant and Namur. We arrived there early hours of Christmas Day, where we dug in, and the weather was atrocious, icy. I've never known the cold like it. Anyhow, I said the Americans who were very glad to be getting out. They said there's German panzers just down the road, which there were. Anyway, they sent fighting patrols against us, which we repulsed. And then New Year's Day, we got orders to advance and clear them out of the village of Bure. We attacked there, and there was severe house-to-house fighting. We were losing heavy casualties, well, they were as well. But we saw 2 sides of German soldiers. On the second day, we had a lot of wounded lying on the street, lads that had been hit as were trying to get into the houses which the Germans were occupying. And up the street came a German Panther. It was a German medium tank. And we thought, oh, for the worst. The medics were attending the wounded. Anyway, the tank clanked to a halt. He flicked open the lid and he spoke perfect English. He said, it's much too dangerous for you men here. Attend to your wounded and then take them away, but don't come back. It's too dangerous for you. Pulled the lid down and clanked on down the street. Earlier that day, we'd run across a house at a little hamlet called Bande, a couple of miles away, Bande in Belgium. A house boarded up, in which an attempt had been made to set fire to it. When the boards were knocked down, we found the cellar packed with bodies, all of which there were Belgian civilians who had been shot through the back of the head and punched down the cellar steps. Actually, a friend of mine who still visits me from Blackpool, who's in our battalion, got the unenviable job of he's there. That's him on the other side, of taking the Belgian women round to try and identify their sons and husbands. It's now a shrine, actually. They've made it into a memorial with all the photographs. We've been, actually, the wife and I. It's now a shrine.
What's that village called?
At Bande, Bande, Bande. it was SS had done it. The Germans, when the Americans had pulled out, the SS had moved in and they rounded up all these lads. One managed to run away and got away, and that's how we knew who had done it was SS. But they were all shot, all been then punched down the cellar steps. And as I say, that was the other side of German brutality. German humanity was the one with the tank. But again, it cost us, I think the official total, that we'd lost 168 men taking Bure. But yet you will find in the records very little mention of British troops. But I can assure you that where we were attacking was the tip of the German 5th Panzer Army.
Battle of the Bulge.
The Battle of the Bulge. We were there. We took a lot of prisoners and handed them over to the Americans, the prisoner of war camps at Dino. And another amusing incident, while we were doing that, we took these prisoners and handed them over because they were SS, and the Americans wanted all of SS men to be handed over to them because they had been a massacre at Malmedy. 150 Americans had been shot dead. Mm-hmm. Anyway, our corporal decided we would break down near Brussels on our way back, which we did. And we all toodled into a nightclub. And I've got to explain to you that francs, 5 and under, were still legal currency. So when you took prisoners, the first thing you did was you looted them and collected all the francs you could. And we went into a nightclub and we were amazed that all those British troops all there in their best battle dress, all sipping wine and having the time of their lives. And we thought, 60 miles down the road, we're living in the open, being frozen to death, and these fellas are having the time of Nelly. And yet, I've often thought about it, they'll wear the same France and German star that I do. But the nearest they got was 60 miles from the front. But however, again, that's another story. Anyway, end of February, we were moved up to Holland, near Venlo, on the banks of the River Maas, in which we were dug in there. Facing us was the 7th German Parachute Division. And we were confined more or less to fighting patrols, in and, going across, taking a prisoner, and they would do the same. We lost a couple of men there. Terry was killed there. That lad, Terry of ours, was killed there. A bit of shelling went on. And we were there to beginning of March, when we were suddenly pulled out, flown home to England, and told that we were to be prepared for an impending airborne operation, which turned out to be the Rhine crossing. Now, where we were going was near Wiesel, not that far from Arnhem, which had been a catastrophe in the September. But we were told we were taken into camps from Colchester to an airfield near Colchester. I don't even know the name of the airfield now. And we took off at 9 o'clock in the morning. We took off, and it was approximately 10:30 when we jumped over the Rhine. And the anti-aircraft fire was murderous. That's the only way I can describe it. They really let us have it. And so much so that we now know we lost 1,200 men in 20 minutes. Now the American 17th Airborne Division suffered similar casualties. Some of them were hanging in the trees of where I landed. As I said, it took the rest of the day because the Germans, they were all infantry, paratroopers defending. And it took us quite a bit, because we had to silence the guns, which was our main job, that would have hit the lads who were crossing the Rhine. But we managed to do the job, but at heavy cost. The farm I took was called Koppenhof Farm. We captured that. As a matter of interest, I went back there several years ago, and we've gone to Coppenhoff Farm, and the chap who ran the tour that took us knocked on the farm door, and the lady came out and and he said, "Coppenhoff Farm, yeah." And she didn't understand what he was talking about, so I walked up and I said, "Volschemjäger, here, 1945. Oh, flung her arms round my neck, kissed me. I thought would have been told to take your hook. The wife and this lad from Blackpool, he was wounded on the Rhine crossing with Tony, and were in mini coach at the end of the path. Bring in, bring in. And this German family who owned the farm, it was the grandmother that we met in 1945, laid a spread on for us. Treated us quite royally, and I have it in there, a book in German of the airborne landing. And impressed upon us, our husband did, that how grateful they were it was the English that landed and not the Russians. Because our grandmother had seen how we treated their wounded the same as we treated our own. And as I say, I got a pleasant shock then when we went back to there. But as I say, whilst we were at that farm, we were impressed upon us. We would not interfere with the German civilians who lived there.
So you were billeted there then?
Well, we were spread out round it. But how I know so much about it was I was walking around on guard that night, and I looked through the window and I saw these officers all eating ham and eggs. And this rather buxom German lady was the grandmother. And she saw me peering through the window. And say 10 minutes later, she come out and patted me on the cheek. And she said, "Yeah, kindred, child," and brought me ham and eggs out. And as I say, that's the book that they presented us with. And they were very kind to us, weren't they, Greta?
So I'm just holding on to the camera. Just pulling that now.
And they did a lot of work. Now, Tony, his glider was hit. He came in with the Ulster rifles, and his war finished then. He got shrapnel in his arms and what have you. And he was evacuated that night. Now, Major Vickery, my old company commander, how lucky I was that I went in the parachute section, because if I'd gone in that glider, I'd have been in the Reichsfeld Cemetery. There were no survivors. They crashed into the railway station at Hamilkiln, which Greta and I had been there. We went back there, and there weren't any survivors. All 30 were killed. Ulster Rifles lost 300, and the reason I know this, I researched it afterwards, 360 killed. Oxen Bucks lost similar, nearly 300 and odd killed. So the glider-borne men took a real hammering, because they were waiting on them. And we cut down, we buried our dead near Coppenhoff Farm in batches of 50. And we cut down quite a load of American lads who were hanging in the trees, had been shot dead as they came in the 17th Division. And the Americans came and collected them in trucks. And I know now they're buried in Holland. It was. The following day, after we buried our dead, we started advancing through Dortmund Elms Canal, up through Sells, Lüneburg Heath, and each day we had a little battle. You run across probably 150 Germans with tanks, self-propelled guns that put up a show. You'd kill some of them, they'd kill some of you. The following next day, you'd move another few miles on and there'd be another group waiting on you. In fact, we were shelled several times from the rear. We'd bypassed some guns that we hadn't spotted, and it was a strange sort of war that last month. But near the end of April, Ridgway, he was an American general, General Ridgway, who commanded all the airborne troops at that time, had came up, and we were told we were to head for Wismar on the Baltic Sea to get there before the Russians. So we were all piled onto tanks and all sorts of transport, and we bashed on. And we did 40 miles in the day, but we took Wismar because the Germans weren't resisting. They were actually on the road, German military police waving us on. And there were streams of German soldiers and refugees streaming to get away from the Russians.
Were you surprised when you were told you had to get there before Russia?
Yes. And the reason was obvious to us, to stop the Russians getting through to Denmark. Because if they had got to that point, it was way open into Denmark. Anyway, we got to Wismar. What we did find, an awful lot of German families had committed suicide. You see, we were 40 miles away. The Russians were 2 or 3 miles away on the outskirts. And the Germans were very fearful of what would happen, as it happened in other German cities. In fact, at first, it was all, when we met the Russians, it was all slapping and shaking hands and drinking, all pals together. And then an incident occurred. There was a big Luftwaffe hospital in Wismar. Now, we found they were treating some of our wounded there as well. And these Russians, all drunk, decided they were going to have the female nurses and tried to storm the hospital. I didn't actually witness it, but we were told that the guards that we had placed on the military hospital opened fire and killed some Russians. So then the balloon went up, and apparently the records tell us that the Russians said that their orders were to take Wismar and didn't stipulate from whom. And our general had said, I've got an Airborne Division and a brigade of tanks. We'll stop you. You aren't coming through here. But eventually they did. We were taken, a fortnight afterwards, we pulled back across the Elbe and were flown home. So when we got home, we were given leave, issued with jungle kit, little short carbine rifles, told to prepare for the Far East. The 5th Parachute Brigade was already underway, and but as I say, fortunately, the atom bomb dropped. So they decided we should go to Palestine. And the troubles were just starting then, so we had 18 months of guerrilla warfare there. And the 5th Parachute Brigade went to Indonesia from India. The Indonesian rebels were intent on massacring all the Europeans who'd been interned there, and Japanese. So the Japanese commander offered his services, a Major Kaido. He said, I offer the services of my troops. So they were given their weapons back, and our fellows found them, because all there was one brigade of 3,000 British soldiers there trying to keep massacres occurring until Dutch troops could arrive, and they had to be reformed after the war. And they found themselves side by side with the Japanese. That's actually been documented, so it's they never came back to us in Palestine, because we got a brigade. The 1st Airborne Division were disbanded, the Arnhem crowd, and a brigade of them came to us in Palestine, and we were there, as I say. I was there till I got demobbed in May 47, and the Airborne Division was demobbed, disbanded in 1948 after the return from Palestine. So it's only 2 years since I joined this Morecambe branch. Lawrence Long has formed it.
He gave me your contact details.
Yeah, he's formed it. He was an engineer, one of the engineers.
You said he was in Suez, I think.
Mm.
So just going back, when the war started, how did everyday life change there? When did they bring in blackouts?
Well, there was rationing. Food ration was the first thing. Everybody would hoard. I don't know about England, Greta, but did everybody hoard up here sugar and tea?
Yes.
That was the sort of thing went on. The Republicans were shown complete sympathy for Germany. at that time until the Germans bombed it. When Belfast was blitzed, it was a different story then. But they often said that by bombing Belfast, the Germans give the British Army 2 more divisions of men, because there was a rush then of volunteers to hit back.
Was that a factor in your decision to join the band?
In a way, and a couple of school lads, you saw where their houses had been, didn't we, when we were over to Belfast? It was only a couple of 100 yards from my home. But in my little tin pot young way, I suppose that was in my head, you know. I'll avenge me school pals. So it sounds a bit silly now, but...
Well, to you was the army just employment, or was it something you thought you had to do?
I was working, at that time, I was working in Mackey's Foundry. And I was actually earning decent money there. It was £2, 10 shillings a week on nights I was earning, which was reasonable money in milling shell tools. And then my dad died, and that our whole life changed. I moved to London then. Younger brother, the family was split up. My younger brother was living in Lancaster at my aunt's house here. Him that was eventually became a policeman. He was living at my aunt's house. Had a sister living in Morecambe, and a sister in London. And now at the moment there's 3 of us, a sister in Melbourne, Australia, one in Sittingbourne, Kent, and me. The 2 brothers have died, and 2 of my sisters have died.
When, what did you think of Chamberlain and his policy of appeasing Hitler?
Which?
Chamberlain and his policy of appeasing Hitler. What do you think of him?
He probably did a very good thing, because at least it gave us a chance to build up the Air Force for another year. Because at that time, if Germany had launched their attack, at that time, well, it was bad enough as it was, but I think we could have lost the war. If Germany had used their common sense, we would have lost it. I mean, if they had come across after Dunkirk, we couldn't have stopped them. There was nothing to stop them.
I said I had spoken to someone who was at Dunkirk. After Dunkirk, he was put in this. They were called an anti-tank unit. Yeah. The only thing is, all they had was 1 anti-tank rifle, and it would have been of no use against a Bren gun carrier, let alone a tank.
The Piat gun that they gave us was a huge thing, about this big. To cock it, you had to get it on the ground and cock it. Then you put this 2-pound bomb in it, and you do it until the German tank got within 30 to 40 yards of it. So you got 1 shot. If you missed it, you knew you were dead. In fact, I've told this story a few times, haven't I, about the first time we were introduced to it on the Salisbury Plain. They took us down to show us this new tank weapon. So we all toodled down, we were behind sandbags. And this lad was a corporal who was with a Piat. Number 2 puts the Piat bomb in, fire, and it fell out smoking in front. The kind, what this lad said, he said, I turned round to say, what do I do now? He said, you devils were 50 yards away running like hell. And what it was a faulty bomb. They didn't usually drop out like that. They usually, but they have knocked out tanks and did damage, but against heavier German tanks, you may as well use the people for.
Was 30 metres too close to
well, if the Germans could see you, you were dead. The best time to use them was at night time.
So when you were training, how long did your training last when you first joined up? From when you first joined up?
From October, I was in the depot. I left the depot in January to the Irish Fusiliers, and we were doing exercises all over the place there with them. And I joined the Ulster Rifles in May of 43, and then the real exercises started commencing, and I had a rude awakening there with the Ulster Rifles. We went on the Salisbury Plain with 2 2-inch mortars, a young officer in command of our platoon, Lieutenant Arthur Bissett. A Saturday morning it was. One mortar was there, and me and another lad were on a second 2-inch mortar. And all of a sudden this lad shouts, "It won't fire, sir, something's wrong with it. I've pulled the pin." And Lieutenant Bissett went over and he set the mortar down and he looked at it. And he said, "Oh, we'll try it again." And he leaned over and put it down. It went straight off. Hit him in the face, killed him instantly. His brains were scattered all over the place. And what had happened was, it was a faulty pin. When it first time it didn't fire and he'd pulled the doings out, the lad had pulled the pin and it shot up then, so it was in a firing position. And he put the button, he broke every rule in the book. He leaned over it, over a armed weapon, and it hit him straight in the face. And as Major Vickery asked all of us, he said, "What happened to the bomb?" He said, "Because if the bomb had exploded, you were all dead, because you were all underneath it." And as it turned out, it was his human flesh must have been so soft that it wasn't hard enough to explode the bomb, with the fuses in the front of them. But that was a rude awakening, was that. And it was always with live ammunition, all the exercises.
So this was when you joined the airborne forces. It began with live ammunition then.
Yeah. Oh yes. Mostly, especially throwing hand grenades, and you learned a 7-second fuse that you put in, like a little U shape. You took off the grenade, put this fuse in, tightened it. And it was a 4-second fuse. That was for battle. 7-second fuse was for training purposes. So that meant from the time you released the pin, you had 7 seconds. But with in action, the time your finger left that lever, you had 4 seconds. So by the time it landed where it was meant to land, it would explode straight away.
There's an old phrase: 5-second fuses only last 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So what kind of weapons did you train with when you joined up?
I had with brain guns. I had a 303 rifle, and I had a 9mm pistol. A lot of the lads had the Sten guns were very erratic. We even issued us with a silencer. There was 1 silencer issued for every 5 Sten guns.
Was a Sten a machine gun?
Yeah. It was a automatic, fired 9mm ammunition, and it was 25 rounds, I think, the magazine held. The Bren gun was probably the best light automatic weapon of the war. It held 30 rounds, and was very good. It was gas, the little gas thing there, so that the shell exploded, the gas would force it back. But sometimes that got a little bit faulty and you had to switch it round. But usually it was a very, very good weapon.
So on the whole, were the weapons you were training with quite reliable, would you say?
Yes, but the Germans were better. The German Smiser, which was a submachine gun, was far superior to our Sten gun. And the Spandu, light machine gun, fired 300 rounds a minute. It was very, very fast. It was superior to anything we had. So those were 2 weapons where they were superior, and their tanks were far superior to anything we had.
What tanks were you with?
We had Shermans, Churchills, mostly Shermans, who all nicknamed them the Tommy Cooker. The Germans nicknamed them that, the Tommy Cooker, because when they were hit, they burst into flames. And you find a lot in a lot of cemeteries in France and Germany, 3 or 4 men in one grave. Well, they were usually tank crews that were all killed together.
Just turn the camera. Sorry.
As I say, in Normandy, our casualties were too heavy, because it takes such a long time to retrain airborne troops, especially paratroops. And 4,900, I believe it was over 50% of the division. So they had to all be replaced.
So you were in gliders before you were in paratroopers. How did you train battle-wise for being in gliders?
In gliders, you'd come in, land. We usually, during the action, we took off from Netherhaven on the Salisbury Plain, and we landed in open spaces of country which had been commandeered by the military anyway, round Bournemouth on the first exercise, because I remember seeing buildings in the distance and asked where were those that said Bournemouth. And you'd come down, all leap out and then charge in open fire right across. And again, they would have us attack various strong points, and we'd get down with live ammunition, and there'd be probably 2 sections of lads advancing on this point, so you'd keep firing it, and as they approached the object, you'd then move your fire away slightly, but continue firing so that the enemy in that position would still think you were firing at them, which would give your lads time to... I mean, I had 1 or 2 casualties on that.
Just from the training?
Yeah, you know, those ricochets would fly off, but there were a lot of casualties. Actually, you're bound to get it when you're dealing with live ammunition. No matter how you can safeguard things, but if fellas are playing with live ammunition... The other place we went to was Southampton. In the bomb buildings there, we learned street fighting. You'd dash in, all of a sudden the silhouette would come and you'd fire at that. Another silhouette would come, you'd fire on with that, you know, and this sort of thing went on. I did quite a few down in Southampton. That's where we learned street fighting there at Southampton, which came in rather handy. Were
you a good shot, would you say?
Yes. What way can I put this without... during the advance in Germany, we were driving along and I was in a jeep following the convoy, and all of a sudden there was a burst of firing, and I saw this German soldier suddenly appear and shoot off into the woods. And I say now, like a fool, I followed him. I chased him through the woods. He ran into a clearing and there must have been 20 to 30 other Germans all gathered there. So like a fool, instead of running back, I opened fire on them. And 3 of them came at me. One of them with a Schmeiser, he was firing, and I was behind a tree, lying flat. I dropped him, and one of the other one, like a fool, stopped to pick up his Schmeiser. So I hit him, and then I hit the 3rd one. Well, just after that, the rest of our platoon come rushing up. It's been documented, so what I'm saying is I didn't report this. This corporal of ours did. And he played hell at me. He said, "You bloody fool." He said, you could have get yourself killed doing this sort of thing. Anyway, he said afterwards, he said, "We counted 5 dead and 3 wounded." He said, "You accounted for 8 of them." But another 10 minutes and I was a goner, because they were coming round the side of me. There was a full platoon of them. I didn't realise. I just carried out what I'd been trained to do, was open fire. And I know I'd fired about 20 odd rounds because I had to reload twice, hoping the rest of the platoon would come up, but they did. And it must have lasted about 10 to 12 minutes, I would think. I was on my own. Anyway, when we came back from Germany, I was called in the office. And Captain Shearer had said to me, "I believe you were concerned in a battle in a wood at Lundborg Heath." I said, "Yeah." He said, "The corporal here has confirmed that he counted 5 enemy dead and 3 wounded." He said, "So I'm recommending you for an award." Anyway, I was told afterwards I was recommended for the military medal. But then I was told when we went to Palestine that when it came through, it was a mention in dispatches. And the reason that they believe it was, I don't know, I'm only going what I was told. What they believe was that no commissioned officer witnessed it. If a commissioned officer had been there, it would have been the military medal. But I got to mention an oak leaf instead. Not that I was bothered one way or the other. But I didn't realise I'd killed 5. I only saw 3 that I knew that were charging at me. But then there was firing coming at me from all angles. And I was lucky in that the way these trees here are, was a wood, thick, particularly populated with trees, and there was a slight slope. Now after I dropped these through, I crawled away on the slope to another tree. Well, the Germans hadn't realised I was no longer there, and the Spandu that was firing at me was riddling this tree with bullets, but I wasn't there. I was 10 yards away behind another one, but they soon cottoned on that I was there. That's when they started to come round the side of me, and I think that's when I must have hit the others as they were trying to come round the side of me. I had a telescopic sight on my rifle, so I was able to had a bit of an advantage over them. But as I say, a couple of minutes more, I was a goner. I wouldn't have been here.
So were you using a Lee Enfield then?
Yeah. Yeah, which held 10 rounds, you know, the magazine held 10 rounds. But I had a bandolier of 50 rounds, which we always carried.
I'm just checking the camera's still okay. It's still okay then. What did your relatives think when they heard you joined up?
Nobody bothered. That was a strange thing. My eldest sister, I must admit, just said, you look after yourself. But the family, it was because of the circumstances of my dad dying so suddenly and the family splitting up, that I had a younger brother living in Lancaster. I joined the army, and I was unable to keep in contact with them so much, you know. So, but we were pretty, even with 2 sisters now, we're closely knit, you know. I keep in touch. I ring with this, I'm on Talk, which means I can dial Australia free at weekends. So I ring my sister in Melbourne. I don't have to pay for it. It cost me a fortune because I've been on an hour sometimes.
Well,
but that incident has been documented by one of the couriers of Ledger. Went out of his way to confirm that. A fellow called Bob Hilton, who did 25 years in the Paris, somewhere he's I know he went out of his way, and whether he got in touch with Joe Buchanan. But as I say, I was a very, very fortunate lad that I did that somewhere.
Actually, we can see it later. So, when you started this parachute training, were you afraid of?
Yes.
Were you afraid?
Never conquered it. We went to Ringway, and they took us to Totten Park, which is where they hold the flower shows, as a canopy with a round circular hole, and there were 4 of us and the instructor, and they take you up about 700-800 feet, and I always remember, I think I was number 3. Anyway, we stood up, and the first lad gets in the dunes, go! So I could see him hurtling down. I thought, oh my God! Anyway, you did it. Because if you didn't, you had to carry that parachute back and hand it in to these little wafts. And no fellow was going to admit that he was that frightened. Anyway, as I say, we did 2 of those. Then it took us up in the old Whitley, which was one of the old 2-engine bombers with a hole in the centre. And you always hoped that you were the odd number this side, so that because if you were, beg your pardon, the other side, if you were the even number, when you pulled yourself out and downed, you were blown away from the plane. But with the Whitley, when you went down, the blast of engines hit you, usually finished up with your feet in the rigging lines, so you had to kick your way out. And they photograph you in the plane, and I thought I'd made a beautiful exit. And what was he got to me? Number 7, he said. The only way I can describe him, and it stuck in my mind, he came out like a spifflicated crab. Arms and legs all over the place. I thought I'd done such a textbook exit, you know.
Yeah. When you before you did the jumps from planes, what jumps did you do on the ground? So did you do jumps from, I don't know, boards?
Well, the training in the plane was you had a static line, and I saw one fatality that if you didn't obey the rules, it could quite easily happen. This lad had somehow got a static line under his harness of his equipment, so that when he left the plane, he was left dangling. It was as simple as that. And they couldn't get him back in, and they circled round and round. Everybody in the ground were watching it as well. And the poor devil was getting buffeted against the side of the Dakota. And that was because somebody hadn't checked that the static lines were clear, because they were attached to the chute. Well, if your static line was underneath your harness, that was it, because it couldn't open the chute, and you jumped out and you were left dangling there at the end of the static line. And that's the only time I saw a fatality, to be truthful.
Not during the fighting.
Yeah, I never saw a Roman candle. But, apparently they could happen, but at Netherhaven we did most of our training. They were all WAFs that did it, and they were all good girls. I don't think it was ever a faulty shoot. But then we got the stage where we carried a kit bag strapped to your leg, and it was with a pin and a rope attached to your belt. So when you went out, and your rifle was attached to the other leg, so when you went out, you pulled the ripcord, lowered down your kit bag, lowered down your rifle, and then got hold of your... You had to do it quickly, because you were usually, I think ours was 700 feet, usually it dropped us from. So you had a minute or so to get mobile and do your trick, if you will. But as I say, when you read that, one bloke fainted before he got in the plane, and a number of, on our course, legs, injuries, hips, quite a few if you didn't land properly.
Did you ever injure yourself at all?
No. I went down and I did, what was it, 8 there. I did 4, 12, Rhine 13, and one in Palestine. I did 14 descents altogether. 14 descents in my time.
What was the procedure when you landed? Did you have to bend
your
knees?
First of all, you kept both feet together, your knees together, judged the ground, and rolled. As soon as you hit, you rolled. And then got your chute out of the wind, and then folded. And then they pack them up and carry them to disposal. But we did find on the Salisbury Plain one morning, we were out doing a road walk and run, and all we had on was shorts, PT slippers and a vest. And we're all tootling along, and one of the lads said, "Hey, there's a chute over there." And we thought, is it one that's been missed? And we all went dashing over. And it was a young German airman. He'd bailed out during the night. Poor lad was frightened to death. He had it as his pistol. And what had happened was, their plane, we found out later, had crashed near Devizes. And the crew had been killed, but he was the gunner and he managed to get away. And, we'll have a cup of tea.
Do you want a cup of tea?
No, I'll be...
Sorry.
Part of honour at his comrades' funerals, they were buried.
Yeah, sorry, can you just start again because you started telling us. So you said this airman had bailed out and he was on the ground.
Yeah, He was only a young lad, and he was terrified. And he handed his pistol over, and we took him to our camp. And apparently he was from, whether it was a Hankel or not, I don't know what aircraft it was, but it crashed near devices. And the other members, there was two other crew members had been killed. And he was allowed to go to the funeral. As I said, they were buried at a little cemetery at Netherhaven, down the bottom of the road from the airfield. Whether they're still there or not, I don't know. And then this lad would have been packed off to a prisoner of war camp. But we weren't allowed to keep the chute. But just one story. With the Americans, we cut down in the Rhine crossing. We must cut down, 12, 15 of them who've been killed hanging in the trees. And they have emergency chutes. They had 2 chutes. So I thought, I'm having this one. So I said, I remember saying to the corpse, I'm sorry mate, I'm having this. And I took his chute, took his pistol, and we laid them all in a row waiting for their fellas to come for them. And I carried that chute all the way through Germany in a trailer, in one of the trailers where we kept sleeping bags. But when the war ended, we were flown home. And that came by sea, did they? And somebody pinched it, and I thought, I pinched it off a corpse, and they pinched it off me. Somebody got a nice white silk chute.
So I know you said you were scared, but when you jumped out of the plane, and you just sort of got the parachute like that, what did it feel like just to see all the land all around you below?
Oh, wonderful. Once that chute opens, you're king of the May. You look down and you think to yourself, lovely, 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 because you were a bit apprehensive before you went, but once it opens, you were right. At parachuting, if anybody said that they weren't nervous, I think they're lying. Because I never really conquered fear. I did it. I wouldn't say I ever conquered fear of it. And when I told an instructor that at Ringway, he said, you keep on being like that. Just do what you're told to do and you'll be all right. He said, I've done 300 odd and I'm still here. And they're all RAF sergeants that with instructors at Ringway. But he was right, because most of the accidents that happened were people who didn't carry out all the checks that were necessary. You used to lift the fella in front up, 7 okay, 8 okay, 9 okay. That was before you all moved up to the door.
So as they were too confident, they didn't check everything was okay.
Yeah, everybody checked. Yeah.
And how many people would be in one of these planes you were on?
Planes?
Yes, well,
20 of us.
20.
Usually 20. At Dakota, usually 20 men, and the hawser glider was 30, or a jeep, a trailer, and 5 men. It would hold a jeep and a trailer and 5 men, or a 6-pounder gun, 6-pounder anti-tank gun. But they then switched them to the big Hamilcar gliders. They started coming in, huge things they were, carried a light tank, or a heavier gun, so at least you had something to fight tanks with a 6-pounder.
Right, is that if I just pause it for a moment? No, we're not done, but so what kind of rations do you have when you were in the army?
What type of?
Rations.
Rations?
Yes.
We ate a lot better than the people at home did, to be truthful. Guard duties, I was over doing guard duties with bacon and eggs and sausages. Oh no, in battle with the compost packs, little 24-hour packs of concentrated food. But somehow or other, they worked wonders with the cooks. They managed to get hot food up to us from time to time, it was. But in England, we lived like lords. Compared to the people who were on rations, we did very, very well. When I look back now, I've often said to my wife, we lived better than you did. There was no shortage of stuff, you know. When you were on exercises and things, like that was a different thing. But when you were in camp, you ate very well. Yeah. Breakfast, porridge, usually got an egg or so.
What would you say is your best memory of your time in the army?
Best memory? On the troop ship on the way home, thinking, I've made it.
Was this when war had ended?
Yeah. I've made it. And then some wag came out with a statement, BLA, you know what that means? That we were a British Liberation Army, we were called. Yeah, it means Burma lies ahead. He was right, one of the wags come out with that. They said that's what that means, BLA, Burma lies ahead. But when the Palestine was, we were doing something I didn't agree with. I mean, I had a look at Belsen, saw what had happened to them people, and yet there I was keeping them out of what they considered was their homeland, you know, Israel as it is now. And we were there, that was why the guerrillas were having a go at us. And most soldiers didn't want to be there, they wanted to be out of it. It was, and then, you know, we got the job at Haifa of transferring people from illegal ships, or they were called illegal immigrants. We had to put them on British ships to take them to Famagusta in Cyprus, and of course violence ensued. And when violence starts, both sides use it, and that was awful. Was that we were using violence against civilians, you know, minimal, but. And I was never happy about that at all. But at least eventually a government called it a day, didn't they? And we got out, which we should have done immediately after the war. But they put us in the middle where both sides were having a go at us, you know. And we lost quite a few men there.
Did you ever regret enlisting underage at all?
Did I regret?
Enlisting underage, I mean, would you rather have waited until you were 18?
No, I didn't, no. Look, now, I would have regretted if I'd never joined the army, now. But I know what I did to the best of my ability. Did the best for the country, you know. So I've no regrets on that score. But, and I've had a good living since. You know, that's, if you're willing to work, I found out in Britain, you get on. If you're willing to put your back to it and work. And when we were first married, we had very little. But everything we got, we worked for, didn't we? So, you know, and I think we're lucky to live in Britain.
When you were preparing for the D-Day invasion, did you have any idea of where you'd be invading?
No, not till we were in the camp. And 24 hours before we took off, we were then told what they do. And his last words were, "Failure, gentlemen, is not an option." After he explained to us what we were to do, that was what he said, Captain Shearer, "Failure, gentlemen, is not an option. It has to be done." And apparently the same words were used by Colonel Ottaway when he told his men that, because we discussed it. They said, yeah, we were told the same thing, failure is not an option. Because if we had not cleared Ranville, set up, they had not got knocked out the batteries, There have been thousands of soldiers killed or wounded on Sword Beach the following morning, but those 4 guns didn't fire a shot. They'd been disabled.
So, did you have any idea that you might be going to Normandy? Or was it...
A good idea. Good idea. Well, not Normandy, but France. Yeah. Where we were going to land, we had no idea. Right. We were on guard duty while they were preparing for it. We used to parade, we were at Cerncote House, near Netherhaven. That was our divisional headquarters. And we were patrolling 24 hours a day, wearing slippers, armed, patrolling round. And at that time, we were told that if anybody failed to answer the challenge, you were authorised to shoot, because these officers were preparing the various operations that were going to take place. And all we were doing was security round and round. That was at Bulford of the Salisbury Plain.
So what happened on the morning the invasion took place? I mean, when did you board the gliders?
Yeah, they were all... the first were cancelled for 24 hours for a start. And then we were told about tea time on the 5th, it's on tonight. Definitely on. So we were all, the gliders were all lined up. But ours was pulled by a Sterling. A line of Sterlings on one side and other gliders on the other, and Sterling would pull in and glider would come click on the ropes, and we'd all climb on and all try to look jolly. Roll me over, lay me down, and when we took to the air, it all shut up. Everybody was quiet.
Were people who aboard the glider nervous?
Yes, we all were. We tried not to show it, but we all were frightened to death.
What kind of briefing did you have before you were sent out?
We had a good idea of what the division's tasks were. And we were told our job was to clear Ranville. As it turned out, there was a company of the 21st Panzer Division billeted there, but that would be to clear Ranville, set up divisional headquarters, dig in deep, because you'll be heavily shelled, and we were. So much so that they were forced to move from where we were at Les Bas Ranville, and we moved up to higher ground. There was too many senior officers being hit. So that was, but we knew that resistance would be strong, because there were 4 German divisions in the area. 3 infantry, which were 60-odd thousand men, 21st Panzer, which had 300-odd tanks, and self-propelled guns and armoured infantry. So we knew that it could be dicey.
When did it feel? Did you feel unsafe aboard the gliders?
Once we were on, I don't know how to explain this. You just accepted what will be, but the thoughts that we would feel never entered our heads. But nobody ever thought that we couldn't do what we were asked to do. This is why General Gale was thought so much of. He'd inspired us all to such a degree that everybody knew what they were going to do, and we would do it. You know, he was a very good officer.
So what happened when you were coming into land on the glider?
Well, you're sitting there in a row, you link arms, and you lift your feet up, and you pray to God your number's not up, because there's just a crashing and a roaring and of broken wood, and you're coming in at 100 and odd miles an hour in pitch darkness, and you just hope that you've made it. Them that were killed, there was quite a few, were killed in the landings. We were lucky, a glider broke in 2, but other than being bounced about and a few bruises, I think everybody was alive, you know. But there was an awful lot that weren't. Even at Pegasus Bridge, 2 blokes drowned in the glider. They were flung into the water.
So why did the glider break apart? Was it?
Well, they're only made of plywood.
Plywood.
You're coming in, in the darkness over 100 miles an hour, and as soon as you hit anything, you hit the ground, the wheels usually go and the grader flies along until it stops. Because as I say, only plywood.
So what do you remember most about the invasion when you went in?
I don't know whether it was fear or excitement, both. Fear and excitement. But once I'd met up with other people and we knew what we were going to do, you just followed orders. You were trained to such a degree in the airborne that you didn't need a second command. If you were told to do anything, you did it. There's no argument about it, you did it. And we were all trained to that degree to do that. But I think that was why we were better than other units, because everybody knew what their job was and we were trained to do it. And pride in the regiment as well entered into it. So, as I said...
So what weapon were you carrying?
I was carrying a 9mm pistol and a 303 rifle. I had 100 rounds of ammunition, 2 bandoliers. I had 2 36 hand grenades in one pouch, and I had a stun grenade in the other pouch. That was a Bakelite grenade, which you pulled it if you just wanted to stun the opposition into being paralysed for it, because it made a hell of an explosion, and by the time they'd recovered you'd be on them. And that was for especially houses. If you threw the Bakelite grenade in, it would make a hell of a bang, disorientate the people in the house, and you could be in and spray them.
So
and I was carrying 6 mortar bombs.
Right.
I forgot about it.
Did anyone aboard the Goliath have anti-tank weapons at all?
Yes, there was a Piat gunner. We called him the Platoon donkey. That was unfortunate enough to be lumbered with that. And some others were carrying 3 Piat bombs. You know, everybody was carrying something. I was carrying mortars, 6 mortar shells.
So did you have a choice of what weapons you carried,
No,
or were you just given?
You were detailed them.
Yeah. So what was your first? What was your first combat like then?
First contact I had was the Merville Battery. And that was the first time we used the bayonet. We fixed bayonets when we went in on that. I'd just charged in, and anybody who got in your way was either shot, killed, or... I think we were told there was... I only ever saw 2 German prisoners, but we only took 2 prisoners, I think, or 3. The rest were either killed or wounded. And there were 130 Germans manning the battery. And there were 150 of us, and they had 6 machine guns. So actually it was an operation where we took them by surprise.
Was it heavily fortified?
Yeah, it was. 3 layers of barbed wire and a minefield right across. And we didn't know we were charging through a minefield till fellas started going up in the air.
Did you suffer heavy casualties then?
Yeah, there was 150 of us that took part in the assault. There were 70 of us still standing. 80 had either been killed or wounded.
How did you feel during the battle at all? I mean, did you feel frightened, or were you just told to get on with it?
Yes, both frightened and again, excitement, frightened, and you know, it's hard to describe now, but fear as well. And especially when most of the fight was over, then shells began landed on the battery. It was the Germans he'd ordered his own artillery to open fire on the battery because we were in it. So we had to clear out of there fast.
Did you ever think the invasion might not work?
No, because I wasn't in knowledge of all the facts. It was touch and go for about 10 days afterwards whether the Germans broke through or not, but we managed to hold them. But that was when we were taking heavy casualties, and especially at Breville Ridge. They had that new division there who were piled up high on it, and they nearly broke through, but he threw everything we had in on Breville Ridge and managed to drive them back. There was a tableau of horror at Bridge. Attached to us was the 5th Black Watch, and in one little slit trench there were 5 lads of the Black Watch with cards in their hand, playing cards, all dead. They'd been playing cards and a shell had burst just above them, whether it was concussion or not. But these lads were sitting there with playing cards still in their hand, dead. And another one, a German and a Canadian para. A German had bayoneted the Canadian para to the tree. And the Canadian para, as he was down, had drawn his fighting knife. We carried a fighting knife down a slit in our trousers here. He'd rammed it into the German's back, and both of them were dead. And that was another scenario that.
How did the civilians treat you when you got to France?
We didn't see very much of them. And I think they were a bit worried about themselves, and every right to be so, because we were creating carnage there by landing, so. But basically, they were on our side, But the Germans had behaved themselves in Normandy. There hadn't been a lot of SS and stuff going on there. They'd actually been reasonably well behaved. French women were doing their laundry and things like that, Do
you think D-Day was the turning point of the war? Do you think D-Day was the turning point of the war?
Yes, because once we'd gained a foothold in Europe, if we hadn't, the Russians wouldn't have had as easy a time as they had. Because when you think that he had 12 armour divisions, there was over 3,000 odd tanks. If he had been able to use them against the Russians, he may have finished the war in 1943 if he'd been, because he had to have all them troops there. Norway, he had 150,000 troops in Norway. He had them in Denmark. He had the Palais, up in northern France, where he thought the invasion would actually take place. Well, it didn't. But yes, I think it was the turning point.
So would you call it the most important battle then of the war?
I would think the Battle of Normandy, really. I think the Battle of Normandy was really the turning point, because then we got into the across the Rhine, and we got into Germany itself, and they'd never been invaded before.
When you were deployed in the gliders, did you land in the wrong place?
Yes, we were. We, as it turned out, were near Varsity, which was about 8 miles from Ranville. Now, we don't know whether, I still never found out whether it was the glider pellets taking evasive action from anti-aircraft fire, which was heavy, but our tow rope had just snapped. And so we were cast off, and you had to go down and hope for the best.
So it snapped, it wasn't released?
Yeah. Well, it just, if a glider suddenly at speed carrying 30 odd men, it just break apart.
When you'd landed in Normandy, what were the conditions like around you? Firing,
there was heavy anti-aircraft fire, was pale moonlight, and machine guns rattling in the distance. It was just bedlam.
Could you actually see where you were going at all in all the night?
Just about. Stumbling over hedges and what have you. And
so when you met these Canadians, was that when you headed towards Merville?
Merville. Yep, they advised me to go there. They said the place is crawling with Krauts. Now, you see, it was in the, funny enough, that area of Varsity was where the Canadian Paras dropped down.
When you were at the front line, when there wasn't fighting going on, what were the conditions like? I mean,
as I say,
where you lived. That
yeah,
sort of thing?
where we were up on the Esplanade, which was overlooking Ranville, and I could see right away in the distance. And we're manning a Horliken gun there, a 20mm Horliken gun, which we used at night because the Luftwaffe never showed their nose during the day. It was at night they'd come droning around. And as I say, mosquitoes, after the first fortnight, things quietened down for us. So then once we'd taken Bréville and pushed the Germans off the ridge, ours was then defensive duties. We were getting shelled, but things were a lot quieter than they had been. Give us time to dig a bit further in.
Did you get attacked at all while you were digging in? Did you get attacked at all?
Well, they did attack us with self-propelled guns on a few occasions, but they were driven back by artillery. They're usually about a company of Germans, right about 100, and probably a couple of self-propelled guns had come. They were probing attacks, if you will.
So what happened after Normandy then? Whereabouts were you sent when the invasion had more or less finished?
As I say, we pushed up the coast in August, beginning of August. We were ordered to advance up the coast. And that was that same German division we were up against that were retreating. And we went through Jouville, Trouville, right up the coast of Normandy, right up that coast. We got in the area of Honfleur and round that area, Pont Audenar and Honfleur. The Germans had already retreated as best they could towards Le Havre, blown what bridges they could and got out of it. And then the word got round, we're going home. And we'd heard it that many times, nobody believed it, but it was true this time. We were getting pulled out. We'd had a Belgian brigade attached to us because we'd taken that many casualties, we were down to half strength. So some companies had barely, instead of 100 men, there were only 30 or 40. And that's, so they decided we'd done although we shouldn't have been in there that long, the Americans pulled their airborne divisions out after 10 days. And we were kept there for 3 months.
So when you were sent home and you were doing the parachute training, you said you had to do jumps from balloons. What was that like?
Barrage balloon jumps was very frightening, to be truthful, because it was a sheer drop. When you jumped out of a barrage balloon, you hurtled straight down the ground. There was no noise. Everything was quiet, and you went straight down. But you did 2 of those. But in the old Whitney aircraft, as I say, if you were the odd number and you were facing the engines, usually if you rung the bell, that they called it, that means caught your chute on the rim and got a broken beak, it was going to cost you £1 for everybody in the plane. So that was a standard rule, was that. So everybody made sure that they got into the middle of the aperture. So we did 2 jumps from Whitley's, and the rest were from Dakotas, in groups of 5, and then a group of 10.
So you know when you were sent to Belgium or the Ardennes after during the Battle of the Bulge, was that what were the living conditions like at the front there?
Horrible. I have never been as cold in my life. It's thick with snow, icy, and to be truthful, it's lucky we all didn't get hypothermic. because we were freezing. I had newspapers stuffed down my legs in between to try and keep warm. And you don't put your bare hand on your rifle, on the metal, it would stick to it, take the skin off your hand, it was that cold, bitter.
Did anyone get frostbite?
Yes, quite a few. And a lot of fellas were taken into hospital with hypothermia, especially if you were stuck in a slit trench. I mean, it was so many degrees below zero at night, you know, it was a bitter cold.
Did you ever get attacked in those conditions?
Oh yes, they shelled as regular.
Did you ever have to attack anyone? No, were you just
no, we didn't go on the offensive till the beginning of January. Then we started advancing around Rochford, Bure, Bondy, on a front, and that was when we drove the 5th Panzer Army back. And that's when we took a lot of prisoners. We had to take them to Dino, the American camp at Dino. Some of them were SS, that was why we got the order to take them there.
What were the prisoners like you took?
A bit subdued, to be truthful. But we fed them. They did get fed. But a lot of them said they were glad to be out of it.
Did they still think Germany would win?
No, they knew they were beaten. Because one fellow had said, he didn't say it to me, but he said to some others, "You're still in the war. We've finished. We're out. You people are still at risk. You're still in it."
Did any of them try and talk to you at all, like getting to tell my relatives I'm alright or anything?
They were very evasive in ways when you tried to talk to them, because on the Rhine crossing, during the advance through Germany, we captured the German headquarters with the general and the lot in it, and I spoke to a few of their officers, and they were always evasive. You know, that's why they were continuing to offer resistance when they must have known it was all over. But it's the way they were. I suppose we would be the same. Yeah.
So what happened during the crossing of the Rhine? What was your unit's objective?
Our duty was to clear the area round Koppenhof farm and set up divisional headquarters, and also knock out enemy positions that were there, because they were dropping us in broad daylight on top of the guns. We were coming in right in broad daylight on top of them. Gliders got the worst end of the stick, because we got down, but the gliders coming in were being shot up left, right and centre. The damn 4-barrel 30 and 20 and 30 millimetres, quite a few of them firing. You see streams of tracers going up, and a lot of paras were hanging in the trees. They'd been shot with machine gun fire as they came down.
Did any fire ever come near you at all?
Pardon?
Did any shots never come near you?
Only about 30 into the top of my chute. Riddled with bullet. Most fellas were the same.
Were the Germans around you when you landed?
Yep, they were all around us.
What did you and your men have to do then?
Yeah. Well, we had to kill them.
Because they had to attack the guns as well?
Yeah. Well, they killed us, one of the two, because we had a lot of dead. Colonel Ford, we got attacked about a company of Germans, and he rallied at his Colonel Ford at the front of us, and we all set off, and next thing we knew, a shell had landed and killed 6 of us. And we were all stunned. But the counter-attack worked. They retreated. So he was killed, was Gerald Ford. He was an MC. He'd won the Military Cross earlier on. So
the Allies troops managed to get across then?
Yeah.
How long did it take for them to reach you? I mean, a few hours, would you say?
Yeah, roughly that. Because they were coming into Hummelkiln, in the village of Hummelkiln. Because they'd landed before us across the Rhine.
Yeah.
We'd come in on top of the guns that were ready to blast them, you know. And they had, as I said, a hell of an armoury there of guns and weapons. And
What did you think of Churchill during the war?
Well, everybody thought he was a wonderful doings, and yet he made some disastrous errors, didn't he? You know, Dieppe and word things like that.
Did you think he was a good leader?
Yes, good wartime leader. But as I say, up to him coming in, everything was going downhill. You know, actually we should have lost the war. The Germans were sadly at fault in that after Dunkirk. If they had invaded, we would have lost it. And I don't think Battle of Britain made that much difference. That if they had put their minds to it, the same as they did in Crete and places like that, 3 or 4 divisions of Paris coming in, it would have. No, I think we could have lost the war very easily. That's my son. He's off today. He'd been to the dentist.
Well, did you ever think Germany might win when you were in the army?
Possibly. Yeah, we knew they had a very good army. You know, but once, this is what I said about General Gale. He'd instilled us. It never entered our heads that we could fail. Never entered our heads. We were convinced we'd win. And we're convinced that we'd do everything that we're asked to do, which we did. Every job that we were asked to do, we did it. It cost men, but we were successful everywhere we did. We Pegasus Bridge, the Merville Battery, the Dives bridges which were blown. Yes, they did repulse the attacks by 21st Panzer Division. Yeah,
So was it when you were in paratroop using it? Was it normal to expect heavy casualties?
Yeah.
Did you have friends who were killed?
Yeah. Had a friends with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I lost quite a few of them, like Herbie Mearns was killed early on, Sammy Glass was killed early on, Tommy Hankey was killed early on. I knew Bill Cunningham, he was killed in about 19th, something like that. And we kept getting lads wounded who would disappear, you know, and you never saw them again, they whipped them off to hospital. So you had strangers coming in, some that you never got to know before they were.
Just checking the cameras.
But basically.
Yeah. So whereabouts in Germany were you when the war ended?
Wismar on the Baltic Sea, right on the Baltic Sea. We reached the Baltic Sea, which was what we were supposed to do. We got there, 40 miles in the last day, with the aid of German soldiers waving us on.
Did German soldiers surrender a lot in those days?
Yes, thousands of them. Had one thing, they'd thrown their weapons away, civilians and soldiers. It was like a convoy of humans all going along the road to get away from the Russians. Mm-hmm. As we now know, that's what they were doing, but they were heading as fast as they could.
Did you meet American soldiers at all?
Yes, well, we jumped with the 17th American Airborne Division across the Rhine, and they were a pretty good division. There was a lot of them that we cut down. And I found out, when you got to meet them as individuals, they were very much like ourselves. When you got a group of them, they could be a bit obnoxious, you know, womanizers and what have you. And I think the main trouble between us and the Americans was they had much more money than we had. The 10 times the wages we got, plus umpteen cigarettes and you name it, they got. A bit of jealousy crept in.
Sorry, just I know you said this before, but whereabouts was that event where you were ordered to fire at that Germany was retreating?
At the.
When you were ordered to fire about that officer as the German was
at Koppenhof Farm. That's what I thought to myself, if those people at the farm knew that young lad, I don't know who buried him, but if they'd known that I was the fella who bumped him off, would they have... However, that was...
Where did he come from? Did he just appear out of nowhere as he was running?
Well, we were firing at a group in the woods, all around the woods, and this lad ran from the direction of the farm right across the field carrying his rifle, and he was running as if all the devils in hell were after him. If he had carried on running, I wouldn't have got him, but he stopped by a tree. And as he stopped by a tree, I fired, and down the lad went. And it was it. And our dead were scattered all over the place. I said we were burying them in groups of 50.
So you said someone had looted his body or something?
Yeah. Somebody would have buried him, probably buried near Coppenough Farm, just the same as ours were. But we didn't deal with them. We were too busy dealing with our own the following day. And the day after, we were on the move.
So how did you find out that his body had been looted then?
Well, I walked over as a matter of curiosity, and somebody'd rifled through his pockets. There were photographs and things scattered all over the place. And that's when I saw a photograph of him and his obviously his sisters, I would think. And I thought, he's not much older than me, if that. But a lot of them were very young, the Germans who were taken prisoners. You know, they'd reached rock bottom in their manpower.
You said that was the futility of war.
Yeah.
So how did the German civilians treat you? Were they generally all right?
Very uncertain as to how they would be. We were told there'd be no fraternisation. I've told Greta about this when we were at Wiesmar. They brought up McConaughey stew, great big vat of it, and we were all sitting there with our mess tins. And I don't know what, somebody said, oh bloody hell, look at that. And there was a group of children just stood there, obviously starving. And to finish up, somebody said, oh, fraternisation, my ass. So we called them over and gave them grub.
Were they pleased that you gave them food?
Yeah, and of course we started giving them bits of chocolate and stuff.
So what did the German towns look like you went through? I mean, were they heavily bombed?
A little place of Cell. See, Greta and I have been there since. And it's a really old-fashioned town, but it was the centre of the Wehrmacht's gas production area. Anyway, it was a lovely moonlight night. We were all on tanks to drive through to sail us and the 15th Scottish Lowland Division. And we found out there was no opposition. The Wehrmacht had pulled out and we drove straight through. And apparently if we hadn't taken it, they were going to bomb the daylights out of it the following day. But we went straight through there.
Did you ever feel any animosity towards Germany during the war?
Against the Germans?
Yes.
Oh, yes. There were various times you could have shot a lot of them. And other times when you felt sorry for them. Because you were dealing with people you didn't know. A lot of them you never met, never would meet again, you know. So, and especially if you met our arrogant ones.
How do you feel about Germany today?
We never saw much animosity, did we, Greta, in Germany?
Just once.
Oh, well, once one fella come out when we'd been to Colditz, wasn't it? Give us a V. But other than that, no.
So you don't hold anything against Germany today, then?
And I suppose there must be a lot of Germans who have animosity towards us.
Yeah, I'm just checking the paper again. What's your view on the events in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Waste of time. After Palestine, and I'm speaking from experience now, a sheer waste of time because they don't want us there. They never did want us there. And it's the worst day's work. There's lads being killed every day in Afghanistan for nothing because you won't be thought any better of. And the sooner they get them out, the better. Under what's happened to Iraq and what's happened now in Libya. It's like a civil war in Libya between the they're shooting each other. Iraq, they're blowing hell out of each other every other day. You'd have thought history would have told politicians we aren't wanted in the Middle East. We're not wanted. And yet these people persist in sticking their nose in and costing soldiers their lives. We weren't wanted in Palestine. And we were, losing men. They were blowing, the King David Hotel was blown up and blow mines on the road and kidnapping our soldiers and executing them. We had all this to put up with. And it was ridiculous because we were never wanted there. And we couldn't do any good. Whatever we did was wrong. If we sided with the Jews, the Arabs were up in arms, and we sided with the Arabs, the Jews were up in arms. So you couldn't win.
How did you feel when you heard about the Holocaust?
Well, I knew about that from Belsen. I knew about that because I saw it. And as I say, if ever I had any doubts about the war and what an evil regime Germans had, that was it when I saw that. I was only there 3 hours, if it was 3 hours, but believe you me, what you saw on the newsreels was absolutely there. Heaps of bodies, starvation. No, it was awful. Awful. And that Kramer was in Manacles while I was there, and he looked an arrogant so-and-so, the commandant. They hanged him.
So what was it like in Belfast? I mean, were there...
Awful. Awful. The smell was atrocious. They were dying from typhus and all the diseases that associated with it. Starvation, I mean, 600 a week were dying after it was liberated. They couldn't save them. But the heaps of bodies lying on the open, and the stench was all, I don't know. I felt sorry for the blokes who were having to deal with it. We pulled out and went back to our units because we were still advancing up towards Wiesmar.
So what did you do on the day the war ended?
We sat there, and that's when a bloke come out with that remark, BLA. He said, what's in store for us? Burma lies ahead. And there was no celebrations as such. We just thought we'd made it, Because we were still there, the enemy were still there, and so the war didn't end for us at that time,
So no
it may have been for people in England dancing around. I've said to Greta many times when I saw newsreel photographs, what were all them soldiers doing in London on VE Day? All us lot were in Germany and the rest of the Middle East, Far East and what have you. Who were all these blokes who were dancing around in London? And we certainly weren't fighting troops.
Did you feel any kind of relief though when you heard the war?
Yes, yes. But as I say, then we realised that Far East lay ahead, especially when we got issued with the jungle kit and carbine rifles, and the 5th Brigade set sail, and we were told we'd be sailing shortly. I thought I wasn't looking forward to fighting the Japanese, to be truthful.
So were you actually sent out to the Far East?
No, we never got as far as that. We would have been if the atom bomb hadn't dropped in August. The 5th Brigade got there. Our 5th Brigade got there. We were awaiting orders to in plane and what have you, but fortunately for us, so we were sent in the early September to Palestine.
Do you think the atom bomb was necessary?
Oh yes. It must have saved 1 million. It killed several 100,000 Japanese, but it probably saved millions of Japanese and American and British and other Allied troops their lives, because they would not have given in. They would have fought the bitter end. And the Americans estimated 500,000. It would have cost them 500,000 men, and probably us as well, because our job would have been to drop into Singapore, recapture Singapore. That was what they'd planned for us, us and an Indian Airborne Division.
Did you feel any relief when you heard Japan had surrendered?
Yes, when the war was ended. I thought, thank God for that. But then we didn't know where it was going to happen to us. It was just after the Japanese had surrendered that we were told we were going to Palestine. Except the older ones, my age group and what have you, and service who joined up in 42, but the blokes from 39 and whatnots weren't being taken abroad again. They were being kept in England for the mob.
About 10 minutes left. Sorry, can you just tell me about your time in the Home Guard in Ireland?
Yeah, in Belfast. Well, that was about towards 15. And a sergeant in the Home Guard, they were attached to Ewart Mill, the Home Guard unit, asked us lads if we were interested in joining the Home Guard, and about 6 of us said, oh yes, aye, we are. So up we go, and we got issued with uniforms, a rifle, 50 rounds of ammunition, which I had up the coal house. Our little fellow would remember it. Put my rifle up the coal house, and every Sunday would go for training up into the countryside in the Ardennes area of Belfast. And there'd be about 100 of us, all lads, and a lot of them joined up. Yeah, Norman Elwood that I've spoke to you about a lot of times, he was with the 2nd Battalion Ulster Rifles. He was in that Home Guard.
Do you think the Home Guard would have been any use against the German army?
No more use than the German Home Guard was. All we could do with them was, if we caught them armed, was send them home, take their weapons off them and send them home, elderly men. I don't think, when you see Dad's army, and the Germans would have just wiped them off the face of the earth with a German reconnaissance mob if they'd been landed with tanks, but no, they wouldn't have done any good.
So what duties did you do in Home Guard? Were you just on guard duty and things?
Well, we were young, and as I say, full of. All we heard was on the radio about the war and what have you. And then when Belfast was bombed in 41, we felt ourselves we're armed now, But we wouldn't have done any good. And we were also on guard against the IRA, if you will. That was our main objective, was to be armed against them.
What was the minimum age for joining Home Guard?
I haven't a clue. We were 15.
Did they know you were 15? Or?
Yes, they knew.
They just let you in?
Yeah, they knew. The sergeant recruited us all.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about the war today? So what people often get wrong when they think about the war?
Funny enough, I was asked that question with Hans von Luck, Oberst Hans von Luck, and we were sitting talking, and I said to him, what do you think would have happened if Lord Halifax's suggestion that we made peace with Germany and actually joined him against the Bolsheviks? He said, we'd have won the war. We'd have won it. If we had had your Air Force, your heavy bombers, your infantry, and your Navy, the war would have been won long since. Simple as that. He said, now I want to say something to you. If you got 100 Germans and Englishmen, lined them all up in the same uniform, and without hearing them speak, distinguish one from the other, you couldn't. Because they're very much alike. You tell a Spaniard, you can tell a Frenchman, you can tell any of the Mediterranean type Italians, but you won't tell an Englishman from a German, all dressed the same, not unless they speak. And he's right, very much right, because he said, originally we all came from the same race. He said, we're all Anglo-Saxons, all of us. And when you look back in history, he was probably speaking the truth, because he spoke perfect English, didn't he? You couldn't have told him that he was German. But he was a very able soldier, very, very able soldier.
Do you think the war was worth the price?
It had to be, yeah, after Belsen, yes. Oh yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it had to be done. They were an evil regime, and God knows what would have happened to us eventually if we'd made peace with them and even joined with them. Sooner or later that megalomaniac would have had his Gestapo whatnots turn on us, because they'd lists drawn up of who to execute from England, didn't they?
Yeah.
Whole lists of people, all the Jewish community. They'd already decided they were all going to the gas chambers.
Just my last question now. Do you feel proud of your military service?
Yes, yes. I'm glad I did what I did, because I'm not proud of everything I did, but I know I did my best, that I couldn't have done any more. That I earned the right to live and to work in Britain, which is a strange thing happened to me when I'd doings. I'd got promoted, and a certain person uttered these bloody Irishmen coming over here, and I said, hold it, where were you during the war? I said, I earned the right to work and to live in England, not only because of my ancestry, but I said because I wore the uniform of Britain and was ready to shed me blood if I had to do. I said, you didn't. Bill Short. He got nearly, I'd been promoted in front of him, and he muttered this. And I said, come off with that, mate. And I was a bit embarrassed during the Troubles. You know, when they were bombing in England here and whatnots, I thought, people don't think I'm one of them lot. I'm their enemy.
Martin, is there anything you want to add at all? Anything you want to add which you remember, which you think's important?
No, not really. I've done everything that I wanted to do. I've had a very happy married life. And I'm proud of my kids and what have you. I'm satisfied. Very, very satisfied. I'm probably lucky in that way that I'm very satisfied with life. I've lived to be 86 shortly, so what more can I ask?
Well, I'm glad you agreed to share your memories for this documentary. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It'll be essential. Thank you.